What is a true fact so baffling it should be false? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. There is a 1 in roughly 5.2 to the 61st power chance that if you were to slap a table, all of the molecules in your hand and the table would miss each other and your hand would go through it. Story time. I learned this fact from a deep intellectual conversation with my engineering class 2 years ago, so there very well could be some kind of detail I'm missing here, but nonetheless, what I said is theoretically true. Story 2. There used to be a radioactive energy drink called Radithor that was in the U.S. market for a decade from 1918 to 1928. Some of the more prominent users had to be buried in lead coffins. Answer. I was in a play based on radium products in the 1920s, specifically the painting of radium on watch dials to make the glow. The workers, mainly young women, were victims themselves. They were constantly in contact with the radium, and because they had to paint such tiny numbers on the dials, they were advised to point the tips of their paintbrushes with their lips. Many stories of these workers recall walking home at night to see their whole bodies glowing from the radium. They were becoming really sick and slowly dropping like flies. Really tragic. Radium girls. Story 3. Giant squids have a donut-shaped brain so their esophagus can run through the middle. If they try to swallow too large a bite of food, they can get brain damage. Story 4. You could take away all of Wayne Gretzky's goals that he scored during his career, and he would still be the all-time NHL points leader off his assists alone. Bonus Gretzky fact. He and his brother own the record for being the highest-scoring pair of siblings. Brent had 4 points in his whole career. Story 5. Every day that you go to work, you pass more people than an average medieval person did in their entire life. Story 6. The USA is the third most populated nation on Earth. If you were able to add 1 billion people to the US population today, it would still be the third most populated nation on Earth. Story 7. The gravity of black holes is so great that it literally bends light around the black hole, so that if you could somehow stand close enough to a black hole and look straight ahead, you would actually see the back of your own head. Story 8. When the 22nd president of the US, Grover Cleveland, was 27 years old, he was friends with a married couple who had a baby girl named Frances. As a gift, he bought them a high-end baby stroller for little Frances. 21 years later, he married Frances and she became the youngest first lady. Think about that. Story 9. A morbidly obese person can survive with absolute starvation without any sickness or feeling ill, under close control. There have been studies since 60s. There is a patient in 1973 who went under a 382-day starvation diet for therapeutic purposes, under close control with only vitamin and mineral supplements and water intake without protein, carbohydrate, or fat intake. No food at all. Dropped from 207 kilograms to 88 kilograms, and maintained it. After a follow-up checkup 5 years later, the patient was 96 kilograms, stabilized. Prolonged fasting had no ill effects. If anybody is curious about the article, the PubMed ID is PMC 2495396. Edit. Fixed autocorrect. Story 10. People were deliberately infected with malaria to cure their syphilis, and the man who developed this treatment, Julius Wagner Jauregg, received the Nobel Prize for it. The extremely high fevers of the malaria infections eliminate the syphilis bacteria. Then the patients were cured of the malaria using quinine. Story 11. The life of Frame Selak, the luckiest unlucky man in the world. January 1962. Frayne is riding on a train through a freezing canyon when it fell into an icy river. All 17 other passengers died while he escapes with a broken arm and hypothermia. 1963. On his first plane trip, he was sucked out of the plane's door and landed in a haystack, unscathed. 19 other people were eliminated in the crash. 1966. He was riding in a bus when it skidded off the road into yet another icy river. 4 passengers drowned while he only received some minor cuts and bruises. 1970. His car's engine burst into flames while he was driving, but he managed to escape before it exploded. 1973. In yet another driving incident, his car's engine was doused with hot oil from a broken fuel pump. This caused flames to shoot through the air vents, singing off all of his hair. He was otherwise unharmed. 1995. He was hit by a bus but only sustained minor injuries. 1996. To escape a head-on collision with a United Nations truck on a mountain curve, he swerved into a guardrail that broke on impact. To save himself, he jumped out of his car's open door and grabbed onto a tree branch as he watched his car plummet off the cliff. Suffice to say, the guy had a complicated relationship with the Grim Reaper. Edit. Got his name wrong. Edit 2. Got the first edit wrong. Turns out I was right the first time. Story 12. TSA's fail rate is over 80. I personally know someone who in his carry-on accidentally packed a loaded handgun, made it on the plane, and was so freaked out when he landed, he UPS'd it back home and took a Greyhound bus after his trip. Answer. I've personally traveled through TSA with a knife 8 times and pepper spray about a dozen times. The first couple times I forgot, but after that I literally just wanted to see how many trips I could take without it being caught. I also can't remember the last time I was asked to present a quart bag of my liquids. They don't even ask if I have liquids anymore, just if I have a water bottle. Story 13. Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein thrice in the last 50 years. On the first time in 1976, Swiss military got lost and ended up in Liechtenstein, so the Liechtensteiners offered them drinks like proper hosts. On the second time in 1992, Swiss military forgot that a certain observation post was actually not in Swiss territory, but in Liechtenstein territory, so they just said sorry and forgot about it. Then again in 2007, the Swiss army got lost and entered Liechtenstein, but eventually realized they weren't in Switzerland anymore, Toto, so they turned back. Liechtenstein didn't even know this happened till the Swiss apologized. Again, to which they basically said, no problem, bro. Takeaways. The Swiss army are bad with directions. The Liechtenstein army people are chill bros. Story 14. An eyewitness to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater told his story on national television. Edit. Based on suggestions below, I'm proposing a new version of this factoid which makes it sound even crazier, but still factually true. An eyewitness to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater appeared as a contestant on a nationally televised game show with Lucille Ball. Story 15. Only 4 people have been to the Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the ocean. One of those people is James Cameron, the director of Titanic. Story 16. From 1613 and 1620, a samurai traveled to Rome by way of Mexico. During this time, Shakespeare was still alive. Virginia had been founded for around a decade. Galileo was accused of heresy, and Pocahontas arrived in England. He met the Pope. He was made a Roman citizen. His name was Hasekura Tsunanaga, and was the last Japanese person to officially visit Europe until around 1860. Answer. Another fun samurai fact. Oda Nobunaga had a black man as an official samurai. This was in 1581. Where exactly the man was from, Mozambique, is most historians' guess, and what his name was weren't recorded, but the Japanese gave him the nickname Yasuke. He'd come over to Japan on a Portuguese missionary boat. By all accounts, he and Nobunaga got along great, and he fought in several major battles of Japan's warring states period. Sadly, after Nobunaga's passing, Akechi Mitsuhide declared Yasuke to be not a man, but an animal, and had him sent to a nearby Christian church that had been established by missionaries. There is no record of what happened to him after that. Story 17. A million seconds ago was week before last, July 24th. A billion seconds ago was 1988, 1987. Ed made some rounding errors. We're looking at November 1987. Story 18. The exact halfway point of Michael Jackson's life was January 27, 1984, the same day his hair was accidentally set on fire while filming a Pepsi commercial. Story 19. There was this French guy named Tarare in the late 1700s that could eat anything in any amount. He was able to eat a quarter of a cow on one day and ate dinner for 15 for one meal when he was being tested. He was even able to swallow an entire eel, with bones included, without hesitating. When he went to the military service, they used him as message transport, but after being captured, he went back and tried to find a cure. In the hospital where he was staying, he was suspected of eating a baby, so they kicked him out. He was average weight, and when he died a few years later, they could see inside his stomach just by opening his mouth. Here's a video which explains it on better detail. Story 20. A 500-pound, cigarette-smoking, beer-drinking brown bear named Wojciech was enlisted and served in the Polish army during World War II. Private Wojciech helped the Polish win the brutal Battle of Monte Cassino and was even promoted to corporal. Following the war, he retired in Scotland. Answer: his old veteran homies would visit him in the Edinburgh Zoo after the war and hop the enclosure to tussle with him and share booze and cigarettes. Also, and it seems that to the end of his days, Wojciech never forgot his former comrades in arms. It is said that whenever he heard the Polish language or a Polish accent at the zoo, the old soldier bear would stand on his hind legs and wave a paw, as if in salute. Story 21. If every single person on the entire planet took part in a rock-paper-scissors contest, where everyone paired up and played, losers were knocked out and winners stayed on, etc., you would only have to win 33 times in a row to beat all 7.53 billion people on the planet. Answer: we did this for a room of almost 1,000 people. It was bizarre and awesome. When you lost, you had to follow the winner and cheer them on. It quickly turned into a room full of high schoolers yelling their heads off. One of the girls at our school was the runner-up, and she said it was the most exhilarating and uplifting yet crushing moment of her life. Story 22. There is no universally accepted definition of vegetable. It's a cultural and culinary term and varies from place to place. Story 23. In chess, there are over 9 million variations after just 3 moves each. 288 billion different possible positions after 4 moves each. In a complete game, there are more possible positions than there are electrons in the observable universe. Story 24. There were more planes destroyed in World War II than there are currently intact planes on Earth today. Story 25. There is an extremely rare condition called Stone Man Syndrome. It causes any smallest damage done to tissue to regrow into a bone. Speaking briefly, people affected by this sickness slowly turn into living statues as they get older. Answer: I saw a documentary on that once. One advanced sufferer had to explain to a young girl with the syndrome that at some point she was going to have to make a choice: be frozen forever standing up or be frozen forever sitting down, and the pros and cons of both. Utterly chilling. Edit: I have managed to find the documentary and have time-stamped it to where her mother, not the kid herself, I misremembered, meets Robert Kinghorn, the man I mentioned. As of 2016, she was still going, aged 17, although the disease had progressed. Story 26. If you're launching from Earth, the most difficult place to reach in the solar system is the Sun. The reason for this is that to fly directly into the Sun, you need to first launch from Earth and then remove all of your orbital velocity around the Sun. Anything less will just put you into a different orbit around the Sun rather than directly into it. The amount of power required for that to do it directly is basically impossible currently. As an alternative, you could, for relatively little power, fly all the way out to Pluto distance, slow down much less, and then fall back into the Sun. The trade-off being the travel time is now about 90 years. There are other in-between paths that could get you there for different balances of energy and time, but all of them are tougher than getting basically anywhere else in the solar system with an equivalent balance. There's a mission currently traveling to study the Sun, the Parker Solar Probe. It won't be flying directly in, but plans to make the closest passes than any probe ever has. It's going to make 7 passes by Venus to shed speed so it can get closer and closer to the Sun. The full flight time is planned as just less than 7 years. As of this post, they are 1 week shy of a year in. Story 27. The Planck scale is the smallest known unit of measurement. If you were to expand a single atom until it was the size of the observable universe, about 92 billion light-years in diameter, a single Planck unit at this scale would be about the size of an average tree. Story 28. Spearfish, South Dakota, holds the world record for the fastest recorded temperature change. On January 22, 1943, at about 7:30 a.m. MST, the temperature in Spearfish was 4F, 20 C. The Chinook wind picked up speed rapidly, and 2 minutes later, 7:32 a.m., the temperature was 45 F, 7 C, above zero. The 49 F, or 27 C, rise in 2 minutes set a world record that still holds. By 9 a.m., the temperature had risen to 54 F, 12 C. Suddenly, the Chinook died down, and the temperature tumbled back to 4 F, or 20 C. The 58 F, or 32.2 C drop took only 27 minutes. Story 29. If you shrink down our sun to the size of a white blood cell, the Milky Way galaxy would be equal to the size of the continental United States. Space is huge. Story 30. Stalin, Hitler, and Freud all lived in Vienna at the same time. Edit, and as others have pointed out, including a source further down, Tito and Trotsky were also there. Story 31. When Mount Everest was first measured, it was exactly 29,000 feet. It was reported as 29,002 because exactly 29,000 was not believable. Story 32. Jim Morrison's dad was the fleet commander at the Gulf of Tonkin event. One could argue he played a strong part in kicking off the Vietnam War. Helps explain why Jim appeared to be acting out so much. Story 33. Even if 99% of Earth's population thought you were unattractive, 76 million people would still find you attractive. Story 34. The Hubble Space Telescope can see galaxies billions of light years away, but cannot make out the equipment we left behind on the moon. The fact that we can see galaxies billions of light years away speaks to how enormous the galaxies are, more so than how powerful the telescope is. Story 35. GPS satellites have to compensate for time dilation because time runs at a different rate in orbit. Story 36. If sound could travel through space, the roar of the sun would be deafening, even though it's 93 miles away. Edit, because space is a vacuum, sound can't travel through a vacuum. Edit again. Obviously, lots of other things in the universe would change, and yes, presumably other stars and planets would make noise too. We'd probably all die screaming as the Earth itself imploded from the pressure of traveling so fast through a universe that wasn't a vacuum. Last edit, yes, Jesus Christ, Rick and Morty, as hundreds of you have pointed out. Story 37. Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809, and the first dinosaur fossil was discovered in 1819. This means that he went his early childhood without going through his dinosaur phase. Story 38. The phrase, plastic surgery, has nothing to do with the material. Plastic surgery as a field predates the development of plastics by 70 years. The two terms simply share a Greek word root meaning sculpted or reshaped. Story 39. To scale, the distance between a nucleus and orbiting electron is 16 times longer than the distance between the Sun and Pluto. Story 40. If Earth was a basketball, to scale the moon would be a tennis ball. It would orbit around 7.5 meters away, which is a lot farther than most people think. If the nucleus of a hydrogen atom was a tennis ball, to scale the electron would orbit at about 2,500 meters away. There is no ball small enough to compare to how small electrons would still be at this scale. Story 41. The smell of freshly cut grass is actually a distress signal. It's the smell of the grass releasing chemicals to save itself from injury. Story 42. The record for most children born to one mother is 69, to the wife of Fyodor Vasilyev, B. 1707, C. 1782, a peasant from Shuya, Russia. In 27 labors, she gave birth to 16 pairs of twins, 7 sets of triplets, and 4 sets of quadruplets. Edit. Wife name is Valentina Vasilyeva. Story 43. King George V, Tsar Nicholas Cassier Wilhelm, all had one thing in common. They were all grandchildren of Queen Victoria. They were first cousins. The Great War was somewhat a family feud. Story 44. Oxford University predates the Aztec Empire by over 200 years. And, for fun, one of my favorites, woolly mammoths were still around at the time the Great Pyramids in Giza were built. Story 45. Your chances of winning the lottery are the same as your chances of correctly predicting the second, an animal, chosen at random, will sneeze within a 9-year period. Story 46. The most popular paint color during the 1800s was called mummy brown. It was made out of Egyptian mummies, both humans and animals, cats primarily. It was incredibly popular for a few decades, then fell out of favor, largely because they ran out of mummies to grind into pigment. Story 47. There is no good metric for, quote, the number of languages on Earth. This is mostly because linguists cannot agree on what constitutes a new language and what constitutes a dialect of an existing language. The best current metric of how many languages exist is the number of translations of the Christian Bible. Answer. Fun little anecdote about the Bible translations into obscure languages. A missionary from our church works for a mission that translates the Bible into languages heretofore untranslated and adapts the books and chapters into an audiobook app. He was in a taxi in Kenya and asked the driver what his language was. The driver told him in English that he spoke Swahili. The missionary pressed him and asked if he spoke a local tribal language. The driver said he did and referenced an obscure language he was sure the missionary wouldn't know. The missionary pulled up that language language on the app and started playing the audiobook from some passage in the Bible, whereupon the astonished driver proclaimed, "That's my home tribe's language, and that's my cousin's voice." Just a funny little story that your comment reminded me of. Story 48. You can fit every planet between the Earth and Moon, including all the gas giants. But if you lined up all of Jeff Bezos' money from end to end, it wouldn't fit between the Earth and Moon. It could go to the Moon and back 34 times. Jeff Bezos has enough money to make a ladder to the Moon, and to make it out of money. Story 49. It's pretty well known by now, but calculators today have more computing power than Apollo 11. We got to the Moon with slide rulers and huge balls. Story 50. In Florida, it is illegal to tie an elephant to a parking meter without first paying the meter, as if the elephant were a car. Where in Florida do you find live elephants? Please don't say Disney World and Dumbo. Story 51. There are more trees on the Earth than stars in the Milky Way. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, you've probably made an entirely unique order, as compared to every other shuffle in history. Answer: I love the cards one. When I tell it to people, I usually go with, there are more unique possibilities for card order than there are atoms in the solar system. A lot more. Then when they call BS, I tell them to Google estimated atoms in the solar system, 1057, and compare it to 52 factorial on their calculator, 867. Edit: yeah, I used it when I meant to use E. Please, I just need about 10 to 15 more people to write the same comment, and I think I'll finally learn my lesson. Story 52. In a clownfish colony, there is only one female. When the female dies, the most dominant male becomes female. They are all born male. Story 53. Giraffes have valves not only in their veins, like us humans, but they also have valves in their arteries. Makes sense considering they need blood flow up that long neck. Story 54. From the first manned flight to the moon landing was only 66 years. 1903, first flight. 1969, first landing on the moon. Orville Wright died January 30th, 1948. He only missed the moon landing by 22 years. That really isn't that long if you think about it. Story 55. Sense of smell is molecular, meaning that molecules of what you are smelling are actually inside of your body as a result of smelling them. Think about that the next time you enter a public restroom. Story 56. One day Mao Zedong saw a sparrow eating grain. Thinking that the sparrows were hurting China's grain supply, he and the Communist Party launched the Four Pests campaign. The Chinese military and population eliminate every sparrow they could find. Embassies didn't allow the Chinese to eliminate sparrows on their property, so the Chinese banged pots and pans outside the embassies, 247, until the sparrows died of exhaustion. Unfortunately for the Chinese, sparrows mainly eat insects, not grain. The locust population exploded, and 43 million people starved to passing. Story 57. David, the statue by Michelangelo, was made from very mediocre marble that literally nobody wanted to sculpt, but it was too expensive to throw away. Answer: not quite. It was made from marble that a previous sculptor, Duccio, had started carving for a statue of David for a city hall. He abandoned the commission for some reason, but he didn't own the block, so he left that. Another sculptor had a whack at it sometime later and probably screwed it up. He was kicked off the project, but also didn't own the block, which sat around for a few decades, getting rained on. Michelangelo saw the block, it was known as the Duccio block, and decided he had to have it. The work the second sculptor did is probably why the David has such an odd stance. As for the marble itself, it's Carrara marble, which is a really top-notch sculptural marble for Italian Renaissance sculptors. But it was quarried about 50 years before Michelangelo got it, and I don't know how it would stand up to weather, so there may have been some degradation. It's a darn fine piece of marble, though. Story 58. The elephant and the rock hyrax are related. Also, a cross-section of an elephant's foot shows the arrangement of the bones is very similar to the way a human's bones are structured. Story 59. If you could fold a piece of printer paper in half 103 times, it would be the width of the observable universe. Story 60. Police are not legally obligated to help anyone. That threw me off, but it's true. Supreme Court ruled that they have no obligation to help anyone. Crazy. Story 61. I spend a lot of time on the history videos that put things into scale a bit more. Also kind of morbid, but Ringo Starr almost didn't get a gig with the Beatles because they thought he was too old for their band. Take in mind who's still alive and making music. I am aware their deaths weren't natural causes, but I find that funny. Story 62. If you took every civilian-owned firearm in the U.S. and laid them side by side, you would have a giant belt of guns long enough to go completely around the moon. After going completely around the moon, you would still have enough guns left over to equip every soldier in the world with 2 guns. Story 63. There are more atoms in a single glass of water than there are glasses of water in every ocean on Earth. However, there are more possible versions of a shuffled standard deck of cards than there are atoms on Earth. Story 64. Scientists have had massive difficulty studying the cognitive behaviors of domestic cats. Not because they're not as intelligent as dogs, but because they're too stubborn and individualistic to cooperate with researchers. Source: The Smithsonian and my cat being a fudge jackass. Story 65. In the 80s, there was an organization formed for parents who were concerned about DD. It's an RPG, not substances. Story 66. 13 of all biomass on Earth is just ants. It's technically more near 25 of all terrestrial biomass, my bad. Story 67. Betty White is so old that she was on a show about being old for 7 years that was off the air before many of you were even born. She's also older than sliced bread. Story 68. The Monty Hall Problem. Suppose you're on a game show and you're given the choice of 3 doors. Behind one door is a car. Behind the others, goats. You pick a door, say, number 1. And the host, who knows what's behind the doors, opens another door, say, number 3, which has a goat. He then says to you, do you want to pick door number 2? Is it to your advantage to switch your choice? The correct answer is that if you switch your choice, you have a 23% chance of winning. If you stand pat with your original choice, you only have a 13% chance of winning. Story 69. Most early human inventions like stone tools, fire, and clothing weren't invented by humans at all. They were taught to humans by our hominid ancestors. Story 70. Every time you breathe, there's a good chance that at least one of those molecules was exhaled by Julius Caesar in the throes of passing. Story 71. Boris Johnson, when he's done being PM of the UK, could run for President of the United States, as he was born in New York. Story 72. As many people died in the First Battle of Bull Run, alternatively the First Battle of Manassas, as in the entire Revolutionary War. The Civil War resulted in more American deaths, 620,000, than both world wars combined, 521,000. The scale of the conflict is hard to truly grasp. Edit. So apparently these numbers are questionable. I got this from the museum at Manassas, but see extended discussion below. The takeaway for me is that the Civil War was a lot bigger than a lot of people realize. Story 73. The solar system does not end where Pluto is, or even nearby beyond Pluto. It actually ends at a distance that is 5,000 times the distance of Sun to Pluto. Astounding. And then there's the emptiness of space before you enter the sphere of nearest star Proxima Centauri. Story 74. There are many nerves in your body. So many, in fact, that if they were all active, putting on a shirt would result in so much reaction, you wouldn't be able to stand up in the morning. Story 75. The Canadian government had a secret homosexual detecting device called the Fruit Machine, which it used to find gay men and purge them from their jobs. The Yakuza regularly strip down to their underpants and blow whistles while riding golden shrines through the streets on the shoulders of dozens of men in loincloths. If your husband fudge another woman, you can sue her for compensation. Wombat's poop cubes. Story 76. E pi y wine 1. 2 irrational numbers and 1 imaginary number combined properly equals -1. Edit to add, yes, in the equation I forgot a negative. Fixed it. At least the explanation was clear. Story 77. The U.S. spends $600 billion in defense per year, which is more than the next 7 biggest spenders combined. Story 78. Water is the only substance that expands and becomes less dense as it cools. If it didn't, ice would sink to the bottom of the ocean and eventually freeze the entire planet except a thin skim of water on the surface as the sun shone down on it. Basically, life would never occur. Story 79. During a natural disaster, FEMA monitors the status of local Waffle House restaurants in the impacted area to determine how severe the damage is and how long it will take the community to recover. It's known as the Waffle House Index. Story 80. 70 of all avocados sold in the world come from a single seed some guy sold another guy in 1926. And a third guy had to convince the second guy not to eliminate the resulting tree. Source: via Ryan North's book, How to Invent Everything. Story 81. There is a non-zero possibility that you could molecularly decompose or fall apart. Your atoms could all suddenly combust. Your atoms could align perfectly with a chair's so that you could fall through it. It is so unfathomable how unlikely it is, but it is still possible. Also, look up Joe Rogan explaining infinity. Might keep you up at night. Story 82. Hunting animals can sometimes lead to larger populations of that same animal. The idea of a carrying capacity exists because there's a limit to the speed at which resources cycle or become available. When a population is above carrying capacity, the population will decrease as individuals starve. What is important is that these individuals don't just die. They will try to survive, and in doing so will reduce the number of available resources to others while still failing to reproduce. By culling animal populations back to the carrying capacity, ethical hunters can actually help the population by reducing the number of eating animals to a sustainable one and ensure a better distributing of resources, preventing a population crash. Story 83. Stonehenge, the world's most famous henge, isn't actually a henge. A henge is a Neolithic earthworks, circular or oval in shape, sometimes containing stone or wooden structures, and with a perimeter of a bank then ditch. So what people think of as the henge part of Stonehenge, the stones, aren't what would be the henge anyway. They are an optional extra. It is the ditch and bank perimeter that officially make a henge, and at Stonehenge, they are the wrong way round to be a proper henge. Now, the bit that makes this fact so baffling it should be false is that the origin of the word henge can be traced no further back than the naming of Stonehenge. So despite not even being a proper henge, Stonehenge is the henge all actual henges are named after. Story 84. Probably not the best, and definitely not as good as most of the ones I've seen, but whatever. Only female mosquitoes drink blood. The males drink nectar from flowers and are actually a big source of pollination. Story 85. Polar bear skin is black, and the fur is not white at all. Each individual hair is a clear hollow tube called guard hair and looks white because of reflected light. Story 86. Literally just heard this. President John Quincy Adams was accused of abandoning democracy for bringing forks into the White House. Story 87. A male tiger and a female lion can produce a mixed offspring, a tigon. But when the roles are reversed, female tiger and male lion, another different offspring, a liger. Two different offsprings from two different species that differ by genders. Riddle me this, Batman. Story 88. One of the implications of the theory of relativity is that light does not experience the passage of time because it travels at light speed and experiences time dilation. So for the photons that reach Earth from billions of light years away, such as the microwave background radiation left over from the birth of the universe, the billions of years of transit time are an instant. Entire civilizations rose and fell, with their languages coming into existence and going extinct in that moment experienced by a photon in transit. Entire star systems are born, mature, get consumed by the aging star, and die in a nova, and that time is as nothing to those photons. Story 89. Absent effects from currents, the bottom of a deep lake or the ocean is always the exact same temperature, roughly 3.98 degrees Celsius. This is because water's density is at its maximum at that temperature, and the densest water will sink to the bottom. Story 90. Quantum mechanics, that some particles exist in multiple states until they're observed by us, when they choose one of them. Story 91. Portugal has a very different substances policy than most countries, and it works. They decriminalized just about everything and have vastly improved lives and saved many, many lives. Seriously, tell anyone this, and they still stare at you like you just told them McDonald's is actually good for you. No one will believe you. Story 92. I know most have heard this one, but it's worth pointing out. Walmart has a lower acceptance rate than Harvard. Story 93. Not proven because if we could ever prove it, we'd all likely be dead. But there is probably stuff called strange matter inside neutron stars. Essentially, it is the ideal state of matter. If two neutron stars collide, this strange matter could go hurling across the universe in the form of tiny, undetectable particles. If one of these particles hit Earth, it would almost instantly assimilate all matter on the planet into more strange matter. And in like 15 minutes, everything we've ever known would be a ball of strange matter, roughly 10 miles across. Story 94. China banned Winnie the Pooh because people kept comparing him to Xi Jinping, the president of China. Story 95. If we eliminate humans at the same rate we eliminate animals for food, the world would be wiped out in 17 days. Story 96. Blue raspberry flavor comes from a gland next to the anal gland of a beaver. Blue raspberries aren't real. Story 97. There are more ways to shuffle a deck of cards than there are atoms on Earth. Scrambles my brain every day. Every darn day. Story 98. According to HR, you are allowed to use the work microwave for shrimp, even though you cook that shoot every single day and bring it into the same tiny jerk room that we have to share and eat with your mouth open, you fudge monster. Fudge you, Dave. Edit. TIL, the origin of the word mongoloid, and oops. Story 99. The FBI and CIA have attempted to use certain occult practices, telepathy, LSD, and other psychedelics, for mind control, torture, and remote viewing. Story 100. There is a medical cause of passing known as broken heart syndrome. People who have just suffered from great loss just die for no reason. And upon further autopsy, there is a very distinct mark on the heart. The people literally died from a broken heart, which is insane. Most of these cases are from parents who lost a child, or if someone lost their loved one and parents very close together, or other drastic cases. Story 101. If you were at Point Nemo, the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, you would be closer to the astronauts on the ISS than you would be to any people on land. Story 102. Sperm cells possess the same sort of odor receptors that allow the nose to smell, suggesting that swimming sperm navigate toward a fertile egg by detecting its scent, scientists have found. Until now, such smell receptors had been found to be active only in the nasal cavity. Thanks, Google. Story 103. Alexander the Great was trolled by the Tyrians, who had barricaded themselves upon an island. After 7 months of blockade, Alexander was fed up and built a fudge causeway. After some minor hurdles, they sieged the city, slaughtered lots of people, spared a few, and sold the rest to slavery. Story 104. It is an impossibility to carry a large pile of laundry in one's arms and not drop a single article of clothing. Story 105. That flamingos become pink from eating shrimp. I know that it's a commonly known fact, but it sounds too outlandish to be true. Story 106. The mantis shrimp has a punch that it is as powerful as a .22 bullet, and its punch boils water around it. Also, it has 16 color receptor cones. For reference, we have 3. Edit. The Oatmeal did a comic on these guys. They are super bad jerk. Story 107. That we have an animal called the giraffe, which is basically a leopard moose camel, but all mixed together with a 6-foot-long neck. Story 108. Aaron Rodgers has a 0-37 record when down going into the fourth quarter against teams with a winning record. Story 109. All babies start as girls, but if there's a Y chromosome, the testosterone produced turns the baby into a boy. Story 110. Some prison inmates only get paid 0.06 cents an hour after taxes for their labors, and the cost to make a video phone call to families can start around 3 per minute. Story 111. Continuous farting for 6 years and 9 months would create energy equal to atomic bomb explosion. Story 112. No matter how much evidence there may to the contrary of something, if people are emotionally invested, they'll reject it. Story 113. The ancient Alexandrians had a vending machine that dispensed holy water by using a series of weights and pulleys to sense when a coin was inserted and when to stop dispensing the holy water. This was made in order to prevent people from stealing holy water. Story 114. 80 of all animals on Earth are nematodes. If every bit of matter on the Earth suddenly disappeared except for nematodes, you would still be able to tell the topography of the Earth, often down to the basic shape size of individual animals. In some cases, you might even be able to tell the species of an animal based on the specific parasitic nematodes. Story 115. The largest desert in the world is not the Sahara, it is Antarctica. It is also the one with less precipitation. It rains more in the Sahara. Edit. 1 letter. Story 116. Fidel Castro loved dairy products and wanted to create a new breed from Danish and Cuban cows. Only one hybrid cow survived. Her milk production was recorded every day and published at the newspaper. Story 117. John Lennon was an all-around terrible person father to his first son, whom he basically abandoned and physically abused his wife as well. Story 118. Factoid originally meant an untrue thing that has been repeated so often people think it's true. Many people thought it meant small fact and repeated this definition often enough for it to change over time. So a factoid itself is a factoid. Story 119. Literally any fact about neutron stars, such incredible and wonderfully wacky objects. Edit. I've done a little bit of research and I wanted to share with you some of my favorite neutron star facts, as I realized I've not actually answered the question at all really. Sorry. 1. Due to conservation of angular momentum, when a star collapses into a neutron star, the neutron star itself often begins to rotate very quickly. The fastest rotating neutron star we know of spins over 700 times a second, or at 0.24 c. 2. Some neutron stars have extremely strong magnetic fields, sometimes of up to 1011 Tesla, a few quadrillion times the strength of Earth's magnetic field. This makes them non-ideal holiday destinations, as the field could wipe your credit card strip at a distance of over 192,000 kilometers. 3. We know neutron stars are dense, exceptionally dense, sometimes up to 1,017 kilograms cubic meters. To put that in perspective, a 1 scuba meter piece of neutron star would weigh the same as a solid cube of iron 700 meters across, about the same height as the Burj Khalifa. 4. The gravitational field of a neutron star is also frankly ridiculous, around 200 billion times stronger than Earth's. If you dropped an object from 1 meter above the surface, it would accelerate to over 7 million kilometers per hour before it hit the star. This intense gravitational field also means that the maximum surface irregularities are about 5 millimeters, so not great for mountaineering. 5. Neutron star cores are still pretty much a mystery to us. We think we have an idea of what goes on, but it's very weird stuff. Under these sorts of conditions, matter is about as dense as it can ever be before collapsing into a black hole. We believe that matter exists as a sort of ultra-dense soup of superfluid neutrons, or, at higher densities, neutrons themselves dissociate into their constituent quarks, and we have an ultra-dense quark-gluon plasma. This stuff is exceptionally weird. Story 120. The Australia government declared war on the emus and sent troops armed with machine guns to call their numbers. Australia lost to the emus, with multiple Aussies injured and no emus to show for it. Story 121. The furthest into space we've seen is a photo by the Hubble telescope, which captured galaxies billions of light years away. This means that the light captured in this photo was traveling straight and uninterrupted for billions of years, just to shoot into a telescope and end its journey as a photograph. This also means we're seeing the state of those galaxies as they existed billions of years ago. They may not even exist anymore. The whole darn thing could blow up and we wouldn't know for billions of years. It also means this light energy was generated near the beginning of our universe's existence. Story 122. About 28 of the facts you're going to read here are completely false. You should always also Google stuff you read it just to double check. Story 123. Quantum entanglement. To way oversimplify, if two particles are entangled, you can change one and the other will change also, in the exact same way, at the exact same time, regardless of the distance. Story 124. There is a type of insomnia that gradually worsens over time until you can't sleep at all, so you eventually die from sleep deprivation. It's called fatal insomnia, and it's very rare, but still scary AF. Story 125. There is nuclear waste on an island on the Pacific Ocean, which is covered in concrete but now leaking. The people who built the holding chamber are now suffering from radiation damage. Story 126. How to visualize an atom. Take the Super Bowl football stadium, American football. If you put a single P in the center, that is the nucleus. A gnat flying around the stadium would be the electron. Story 127. We can measure gravity, observe gravity, but we have no definite answer to what causes it or what it is made of. Story 128. In 2013, the number of refugees worldwide rose to its highest since World War II. It has risen further every year since. Story 129. I got one. A true fact is a redundant term. The word true is completely unnecessary since the word fact inherently means something that is true. There are no untrue facts. There are only facts. Story 130. There are 8 times more libraries in the United States than there are McDonald's. 116,000 versus 14,000. I didn't believe it at first, but I guess it makes sense. McDonald's advertise way more than libraries do, so you're more aware of their presence. Story 131. The current American accent is what they spoke in England 300 years ago or so. The English accent is relatively new. Shakespeare should be performed with American accents. Story 132. That a banana tree is not actually a tree, it's a leaf. A peanut is not actually a nut, it's a legume. A strawberry isn't actually a berry, it's an aggregate fruit. And the banana, in fact, is the true berry. Ha ha ha. This is all I learned from my biology degree. Story 133. There are some insects that will attach themselves to a convenient surface, inflate and harden their outer skin, then dissolve their entire body and rebuild it in a completely different shape. When they wake up, they retain the memories of the earlier form, and they can fly. Story 134. I haven't checked my Reddit for 2 days and this absolutely exploded. I've learned so much from all your comments. Thank you all, and may our thirst for weird and fascinating AF knowledge live on. Story 135. Betty White was born in 1922. Pre-sliced bread was first sold in 1928. Betty White is literally older than sliced bread. Story 136. This isn't too crazy, but a lot of people don't know that LASER is an acronym. It stands for Light Amplification by Simulated Emissions of Radiation. So the correct spelling is laser, not laser. Story 137. My true fact 8. The time span between the existence of the Stegosaurus and T-Rex is bigger than the time span between the T-Rex and humans. Story 139. If an atom was the same size as Wembley Stadium, the nucleus would be the size of a football in the center, and the electrons would be the size of garden peas flying around the stadium. Story 140. George Washington died without knowing what dinosaurs were because they were discovered and studied after his lifetime. Story 141. Your brain has to eliminate itself in order to develop properly. It's a process called neural pruning. Story 142. The sound that bald eagles make on TV is actually a red-tailed hawk scream. Bald eagles sound pretty lame in reality. Story 143. This isn't really a fact, more just something that happened once. A man got shot 13 times, survived, then eliminate the 4 ISIS men trying to eliminate him. Story 144. Number 15. Burger King foot lettuce. The last thing you'd want in your Burger King burger is someone's foot fungus, but as it turns out, that might be what you get. A 4chaner uploaded a photo anonymously to the site showcasing his feet in a plastic bin of lettuce, with the statement, "This is the lettuce you eat at Burger King." Admittedly, he had shoes on, but that's even worse. The post went live at 11:38 p.m. on July 16, and a mere 20 minutes later, the Burger King in question was alerted to the rogue employee. At least, I hope he's rogue. How did it happen? Well, the BK employee hadn't removed the EXIF data from the uploaded photo, which suggested the culprit was somewhere in Mayfield Heights, Ohio. This was at 11:47. 3 minutes later at 11:50, the Burger King branch address was posted with wishes of happy unemployment. 5 minutes later, the news station was contacted by another 4chaner, and 3 minutes later, at 11:58, a link was posted. BK's Tell Us About Us online forum. The foot photo, otherwise known as Exhibit A, was attached. Cleveland Scene magazine contacted the BK in question the next day. When questioned, the breakfast shift manager said, "Oh, I know who that is. He's getting fired. Mystery solved by 4chan. Now we can all go back to eating our fast food in peace." Story 145. The youngest recorded mother, Lena Marcela Medina de Jurado, was 5 years, 7 months, and 21 days old when she gave birth. The doctors found that she already had fully mature intimacy organs from precocious puberty. Clearly, she was violation, and the main suspect was her father, but they could not prove it. Story 146. The Federal Reserve has no reserves and is actually a privately owned bank, basically lending money to the USA and most countries, making them above everyone and anything. Story 147. Cleopatra lived closer in time to us than to the building of the Giza pyramids. Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian, she was Macedonian, as was her entire dynasty, and was the first pharaoh that could actually speak Egyptian in almost 300 years. The Roman Empire was closer to us than it was to the Hellenistic Greeks, Greek Golden Age. Martin Luther King Jr. and Anne Frank were born in the same year. Story 148. 60 Russian and Polish soldiers counterattacked and drove off 7,000 German soldiers in World War I because they were so badly maimed by poison gas and artillery that the Germans believed they were fighting the undead and retreated into their own barbed wire. It's known as the Attack of the Dead Men. Story 149. Doesn't matter how heavy the couch is in the back of your moving truck, it will always slide at the same time as a light couch. Weight is negligible at holding it in place. Story 150. There are two people alive that were around for both the first Wright brothers flight and the passing of the Mars rover. Both women. Story 151. Apparently, grass only evolved about 55 million years ago or so, which means dinosaurs didn't have grass back then. How weird is that? Story 152. Israel has some of the best clean water creation technology and exports water. 90% of people in Gaza don't have regular access to enough clean water. Story 153. Women are born with all their eggs in their body, and they will not make any more during their lifetime. Story 154. Pringles legally are not chips due to a lawsuit filed by other chip companies due to how threatened they were by Pringles. Story 155. Orville Wright and Neil Armstrong had lives that overlapped by 18 years. So the first to fly and the first to the moon lived part of their lives together. Talk about progress. Story 156. Due to the trade embargoes and high expenses during WW2, Coke was not able to ship their product into Germany. Instead, they bought a factory and started making soda pop locally under the name Fanta. They even had advertisements rooting for each side. Coke for the Allies, Fanta for the Axis. Story 157. Castoreum is a chemical compound found in the secretion of beavers' castor sacs, which is located by their anus, and is used in imitation vanilla. Story 158. If Earth was shrunken down to the size of a cue ball, it would be the smoothest cue ball you would have ever felt. Story 159. If we eliminate humans at the same rate animals are eliminated, the human race would become extinct in 17 days. Story 160. Before the invention of color TV, many people dreamed in black and white. Even though they could see color, their dreams would be in black and white. Story 161. An F-15A shot down a satellite. An AC-130 has used its howitzer to shoot down a pursuing fighter, and the A-10 is the fastest gun ever built. Story 162. The A center of a neutron star, cut into a sphere with diameter of a quarter, could theoretically fall through the Earth. Story 163. 1. Original Damascus steel produced from the 3rd to the 17th century, aka Wootz steel, was well made, flexible, strong, and able to hold an edge. And no one knows the exact method as to how it was made. 2. All steel produced after atomic testing in the 1950s and 60s has a certain amount of radiation in it due to atmospheric radiation contamination. For machines requiring low background radiation steel, lower than modern steel, people cut it from sunken World War I era battleships. Even lead ballast from the 450-year-old ship, the San Ignacio, was used due to its non-existent radiation signature. Story 164. In the last 500 million years, there has been 6 mass extinctions. The 5th mass extinction wiped out the dinosaurs and happened 66 million years ago. The 6th mass extinction is happening as you're reading this. Story 165. If you spent one day on each of the islands in the Philippines, it would take you almost 21 years to visit all of them. Story 166. Moose are capable of diving about 20 feet into the water and will do so for food. In places where there are orcas, orcas often feed on moose that are in the water. Anyone who has seen a moose in person knows how big they are. So the idea of something that big diving 20 feet underwater is so wild. Story 167. Jim Jones originally imported monkeys and sold them door to door as pets in order to raise enough money to establish his own church. That church was the People's Temple in Jonestown, where he later coerced a mass tragic end of 918 community members. He also received a humanitarian award in 1977, the year before the mass tragic end, for all his efforts in racial integration. Story 168. Neither alive nor a dead thing, this particular prion infects only the brain. It alters personality, gait, and can even cause crazed bursts of laughter. It is incurable. completely deadly, and can be transferred by the eating of brain tissue infected by it. Joker zombies, anyone? Because science. Story 169. Spending 1 million an hour, non-stop for 24 hours a day, you wouldn't run out of 1 trillion for 411 years. We spend 4 trillion annually in the US budget, and there are still people without health care, housing, and education. Story 170. BuzzFeed must be automated their Reddit ripoff articles. Now they just put in their stupid fudge headlines, collect responses, and publish 3 days later automatically. Story 171. My dad once cheated on my mom with a woman who was married to the guy my mom was cheating on my dad with. Story 172. Imagine a list that contains every number. How many numbers are on that list? Infinity, right? Now remove all the odd numbers from that list, so you just have the evens. How many numbers are in this list? Well, that's tricky. On the one hand, it clearly has half as many numbers as the first list, but it also contains infinite numbers just like the first one. Story 173. The origins of my name, Barbara, come from when someone is speaking a foreign language at you and all you hear is blah, blah, blah. Story 174. Originally, New Zealand was meant to be a part of Australia, but they said no. But we still have a bit in our constitution that Saeeds, they can join anytime apparently. Story 175. For a brief moment in time, a laboratory in Massachusetts was the coldest place in the known universe. Story 176. If you had a loop of rope fitting snugly around your waist a tennis ball, and you wanted a gap of 16 centimeters between the ball and the rope, you need to add 1 meter of rope. If you has a loop of rope wrapped snugly around the earth, and you wanted a 15 centimeters gap between the earth and the rope, you'd need to add 1 meter of rope. Story 177. There's a light bulb in a fire station in Livermore, California, that has operated without burning out for 117 years. There's a website where you can check in on it. Not exactly a webcam, but a time-stamped photo that updates. Yep, still shining. Story 178. A lightning bolt is hotter than the surface of the sun. The surface of the sun has a temperature of 10,340 degrees Fahrenheit, or 6,000 Kelvin, whereas a lightning bolt can reach a temperature of 53,540 degrees Fahrenheit, or 30,000 Kelvin, which is 5 times hotter than the sun. Always fascinated by that. Story 179. If you start a job that pays you 1 cent on the first day, 2 cents on the second day, 4 on the third day, and so on, doubling your pay each day, after a 31-day month, you would have earned over 30 million. Story 180. It's not a fun fact, but I recently learned that the ASPCA, American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, predates any organization or advocacy addressing cruelty to children. In 1872, the job of handling America's first known court case of child abuse fell to attorneys working for the ASPCA, since there were no such organizations in place for the protection of children. Story 181. The U.S. is the 3rd most populous country on Earth, behind China and India. If you were to subtract 1 billion people from both China and India, the U.S. would still be the 3rd most populous nation on Earth. Story 182. Boanthropy is a strange delusional disorder in which the sufferer believes he or she is a cow or ox. It usually starts as a dream, eventually taking hold of the mind as a full-blown delusion. The most famous sufferer of this condition was King Nebuchadnezzar, who, according to the book of Daniel, was driven from men and did eat grass. Story 183. Someone ate someone's face 40 miles away from me. It made national news. They shot him. That should be false, and yet. Story 184. If you took all the money in the world and divided it amongst every living person, we'd each have about US 250. Story 185. People in Antarctica are often more remote further from any other humans, than people in the International Space Station. Story 186. There is a framework called the Cosmic Calendar, designed to illustrate to people how old the universe is relative to events that occurred since its beginning. Just after midnight on the morning of January 1st represents the start of the universe, and December 31 at 11:59 p.m. represents the current time. On that scale, Earth appears in the calendar during the first week of September, and anatomically modern man doesn't appear until December 31st at 11:54 p.m. Story 187. There was a miscount in the WW2 passing count, and the most recent recount is closer to 100 million. after the Russians and other countries did a correct count instead of deflating their numbers to make their armies seem more professional. Also, the US dropped a nuke on, I believe, 172 soldiers. Only 2 survived because they were ordered to march towards the nuke to see what would happen. Story 188. Only 1 out of the 5 billion species to ever live on Earth developed a civilization. So I question if there is life in other planets. The odds of it being intelligent life might very well be pretty low. Story 189. 1. By the time you are 30, you've spent a whole month having birthdays. 2. Your keys traveled further than your car. 3. The point of golf is to play the least golf. 4. Every mirror you buy is in used condition. Story 190. Apollo 11 got to the moon with a computer less powerful than a modern phone, which is pretty incredible considering they only had that and a massive fudge spacecraft. Story 191. A neutron star is so dense that a single teaspoon of its matter has the same mass as the entire Earth. Story 192. Hyenas can eat almost everything except metal. So if you wanted to take down someone, throw them naked into a hyena's den, and you will almost always get away with it. Story 193. Rats and mice are extremely social animals that are very in tune with the people around them. Because of this, when doing experiments that revolve around behavior, researchers have to be very careful when doing anything with the animals. They have to be held a certain way, coddled a certain way, and talked to a certain way to keep all the variables aligned. I.e., you have to treat them all the same, or some are going to act differently than others just because of you. They are surprisingly delicate. Story 194. Pi contains every number variation ever. Your birthday, your social security number, your bank account number. Every conceivable order of numbers is contained within pi. Story 195. In space, astronauts can't cry. This is because without gravity, the tears just cover the eyeball and don't flow away from the tear duct. Chris Hadfield was temporarily blinded during a spacewalk when a contaminant irritated his eye. Story 196. Ever since 2004, a town in Italy, Caneto di Caronia, has had a problem with spontaneous combustion. Cars, beds, small appliances, even when turned off, would just burst into flame. Scientists still don't know what causes them, and the inhabitants have just learned to live with them. Story 197. Almost half of America rather pay more money in insurance and let companies decide healthcare prices than pay less but increase taxes, overall lowering cost and helping everyone out. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.